Hello, welcome to PodFic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldscythe. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today, I will begin reading the Silmarillion / Lord of the Rings fic by myself, called The Wraith of Himring. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. On with the show. The Wraith of Himring, Chapter 1. Agony. He wept bitter tears, singing in hoarse, halting syllables, barely able to string the words together anymore. Brushing the hair gently, gazing upon the scarred, broken being in front of him. Sobs tore his throat even more, an iron tang of blood on his tongue with every breath. Ivalar, why? He silently screamed to the heavens as another pass of his fingers loosened more copper and white hair from the broken head of his brother. He could still hear the crack. He had heard it over the rumbling and his own screams. It would haunt him until Arda remade. He looked at him and heard it, reliving the agony he had felt in his very fear. The broken sobs racked his always rock-solid older brother, the shattered, dim look in his silver eyes, the way the light had gone out and he had stepped over the edge, copper hair like fire around his face. And at that moment, he had looked more like his mother than ever, illuminated by the fiery pit below. It's like their father's forge. For a moment, he had seen his brother like he had been, before Thangradrim, before all the hell that was created by the Silmarils. Maglor had longed after his brother as the thought and a crack resonated in his ears. He had fallen on his knees, painfully as he halted by the edge of the precipice. He saw the Silmaril vanish into the red-hot hell beneath. But his brother... He had fallen onto a ledge just before the inferno. His hair turned from copper to red as blood pooled. Madros was just too high to have his clothes ignite or his hair singe, but Maglor knew. His body was broken. Just like his heart after Nirnaeth, and mind and soul after the Silmaril began to burn his only hand. He watched helplessly as the burned hand dangled over the edge of the old Karab. Please. Not like this, he had whispered, coughing as the vapors rose to meet him with the hot air. It burned his throat. He fumbled to get the rope from his belt. He always had one on him, despite everything, and began to limp towards the half-burned tree, struggling to tie the rope around it. He sobbed as his already raw hand began to bleed again. He had to endure. He had to. He wasn't going to leave his older brother unburied. You cannot save him, Ganafinwe, a voice said from behind him. I have to. I don't have anyone else. We buried the others. I cannot leave him unburied like a carcass. The rocks our father so revered are gone. I don't have anything else but him. He chose his funeral pyre. No! Maklor's voice had power behind it still, and Enwe felt silent, just tilting his head, looking at the wreck the second son of Fëanor was. Without words, Manua's herald came to him and tied the rope for him, securing it well to the tree. He then turned away, unfurling his wings. Beleriand will sink. Ulma will claim these lands to wash away the blood. Yet some last vestiges might remain. I wonder, is Himring high enough? With those words, the herald took to the skies and left. The descent was pure agony. As he made it to his brother's side, he ran a hand over the side of his scarred face, to the neck, surprised to see Madros' throat convulse and his eyes flutter. He lived. Maglor began to sing, sang to close the wounds despite the toxic air threatening to suffocate him, sang to keep the sinews together, to help his brother breathe. He tried. With a taxing effort, he lifted his tall brother into his arms, cradling his head and pressing a kiss on his temple before setting to his impossible task, to get them back up. He tried to sing while looking for footholds, anything, while the rope dug into his hand. Then he felt ghostly hands start to push him up. From the corner of his eye, he saw the bloodied, fair hair of his brother, Tuelko, as he was pushing them up, as Karnistir was on his right. Kurvin held on halfway the drop, pointing to a surer foothold, and the rope was pulled taut, and he felt it being hauled back up. Daring to glance back up, at least through his lashes, He saw twin copper heads of hair, and he sobbed, tears blurring more of his vision. They still bore the marks of the injuries that had ended them. He had been almost blinded by pain by the time he pushed Maedhros's body back onto the ground level, pulling himself up next to him. He had laid down, exhausted to his fell, next to his brother, clutching his arm. They were alone. There were no brothers, no twins, no followers, nobody. The two remaining sons of Fëanor were alone. Maglor was alone. "Please don't leave me. I cannot do this without you," he croaked, crawling towards the other's head. He had cradled the once beautiful face with his raw and bloodied hands. There had been blood on their hands for so long he had lost count. He wailed, pouring power into his brother, hoping to keep him from dying. Maedhros had lived on borrowed time. Mighty Moon was long gone. Nelio had died with Vindagana that day. He had felt how his brother's heart had shattered. And then there had only been Maedhros, a warlord. He brushed the sticky hair aside from his face, tracing a scar Maedhros had on his cheek. The strands he hadn't moved weren't copper, but white. Those had begun to appear after his heart had broken. Slowly, as his older brother had begun to fade, bit by bit. Maglor had hidden them with braids, hidden them beneath the black and gold braid he had caught from Fingon's head, the only thing he had still been able to recognize. Gathering what little he had left of his strength, Maglor took his rope, trying to find a way to get his brother away from the chasm. He didn't get far when he heard a familiar sound of horse hooves and looked up to see his trusty mare come to him. He set his brother down on the edge of the half-burned copse of trees, simply weeping against the neck of his mare. She had stood patiently and eventually nudged him. She knelt so she could get Maedhros onto her back and follow suit, sitting behind his brother. Somewhere safe. Not home, but safe. Maedhros lived, but did not stir. He kept breathing. It hitched now and then, or became almost unnoticeable at times, scaring Maglor to his fear. He dressed his wounds by a small river his trusty horse had found. He carefully removed the last bits of armor his brother had worn, feeling along his body for wounds other than the old. He wasn't sure if his back had broken, but his skull certainly had. And had finally stopped bleeding, at least visibly, but internal was always a threat. And infection. His brother clung on to life, whether it was because of Maglor himself, or because he hadn't wanted to die. He had no answer, but he continued to seek refuge before all the land sank. Trying to keep his brother alive, drop by drop, was draining the younger brother, but he refused to give up. They were hauled up by the new shoreline, dangerously close to Elven and Edain settlements, in an abandoned hunter's cabin. It was small, barely enough for 2 elves. Maglor would bang his head on the door frames and some ceiling beams, and he wasn't the tallest of Fëanor's sons. He slept on the floor on threadbare blankets, letting Maedhros have the bed. Even now he was rocking back and forth, humming, trying to keep himself awake. Early dawn that day, Maedhros had started convulsing, a harsh seizure tearing through his body. Maglor had fought hard to restrain him, even though it was unusually the absolute opposite he would have done. Nothing had gotten through, not even the old lullaby their mother had sung to them. All he could do had been to sit there, hold his head and upper body still, fearing the moment the body beneath his hands would go limp. Winter was approaching, and since they were closer to north, where Himring had once stood, he knew what to expect. This time, it would only mean death. He was in no shape to hunt, and his snares were never good enough. They were always empty. He resigned himself to his fate. The 2 remaining sons of Fëanor, the kinslayers, would die of starvation in an abandoned, derelict cabin in the wild. Unless they were found, and Eowyn hadn't said anything, their stories would end by the sea and in the fiery chasm. They had brought this upon themselves. Himring was in ruins, but most of it stood, a testament to the skills of the Noldor. Maglor shivered as he pulled his cloak tighter around him. His lips were bluish and his fingers were almost numb, but he had to keep going. The ice was thick enough, despite it cracking with deep echoes, for him to cross, pulling the litter-like sled after him. The mare he had sent away long ago, not wishing to kill and butcher his last beloved horse. He had poured most of his fear into his brother's body, hoping he could stay frozen in time. He almost smiled upon seeing how the enemy had tried to break the fortress, but had failed, dragging his brother up the broken ramparts, paths, and stairs until they made it deeper into the keep. Finding completely intact rooms he had once infused with song, he looked for a suitable room. He found it in the form of a room that bore still signs of an elfling living in there. Toys, damp, musty drawings, a small sock. "May the Valhalla look after you, wherever you are, little one," he murmured, hoisting the body of his brother onto the old bed. He took care to arrange him to look like he was merely resting. Finger-combed his hair to look a little neater, and put the last jewel he owned into his hand. A ruby and sapphire pendant, set in gold and copper. "I pray that you are at peace now." Magnus' voice was hoarse and tired when he sang for the last time in his life, pleading the Torah of his brother to remain as a memory. Ever since that day, whoever went near Tol Himling would hear echoes of song and see a black-cloaked figure stand guard at the remaining ramparts. The wailing winds during wintertime and tumultuous seas during the other seasons kept even the hardiest of Edain away. End of chapter 1. Stay tuned.